Good morning and good afternoon to all attendees. Thank you very much for your patience. My name is Prue. We had some minor technical difficulties with the main presenter today. Unfortunately, something happened with the computer. The wonders of working at home. I actually work in the RET liability and ETs section at the Clean Energy Regulator, and I'll be filling in for this presentation today. This presentation will be on how to apply for exemption certificates and related processes. Assisting me here today are some people from comms, but also John, who's from my team. Andrew May, who was going to give this presentation, step in at some point during the presentation to take on board. So please be patient with me. I do know the content and I am well versed in the content, but I just haven't prepared this presentation today. We will be hosting 2 other webinars this week. One will be about change of liable entities and amending exemption certificates. That's on tomorrow. And on Thursday, we will be conducting a webinar about submitting your data for the Notice of Certifiable Amount process. But before we begin in proper today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to elders both past and present. Please note that any data shown on the slides here today is in relation to testing data. It is not from any particular participant. I will pause at different stages throughout this webinar to allow for question time, and please feel free to put in any questions that you think are appropriate to the content today, because this is your opportunity to ask us lovely questions. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will be publishing it on our website in the coming weeks. Thank you again for your participation. The Renewable Energy Electricity Act 2000, which I will refer to as the Act for today, describes exemption certificate eligibility and amendments. This includes reviewable decisions, and there are a couple there for you today. One of which is reviewable under 66 of the Act, and that is to refuse or amend an exemption certificate. Other references in the Act actually talk about eligibility, and they are section 46A, 46B and 46C. All of those references are actually how you are eligible under the Act. Exemption certificate eligibility, amendments and associated rules are also found in the regulations and are predominantly found here. There are 2 reviewable decisions. One is when the regulator requests an applicant to provide an audit report with their application. The second is when the regulator changes the use amount formula that the applicant applied for. This would be, for instance, to correct the formula because of system limitations. The CER provides guidance related to exemption certificates on our website. Most notably, we provide the ET activity information for companies page, and this is your one-stop shop for participants participating in the scheme. There's also the compliance priorities. That is basically a list of the do's and don'ts that we're looking for in your guidance tool for lodging applications come the 30th of March 2021. We also provide through the client portal a document user guide. Please go there for anything to assist you in relation to the client portal. Just going back to the compliance priorities, I just want to make that clear that we actually have a priority for this year, which is incomplete and inaccurate applications. If your application is incomplete or inaccurate, we may decide to refuse that application. There's also guidance on the Department of Industry, Science and Energy Resources website. This guidance provides a range of information in the form of the ET activity boundaries document. That is also a great source of knowledge in relation to what poses your boundaries as far as the ET activity is concerned. The department is also responsible for making changes to the legislation, and they also include new activities as they need to. And I believe at the present time they are looking at including new activities. I will now review how exemption certificates have changed under the renewable energy target and highlight the key differences between the old and new methods and identify key dates during the application year. So it all began in 2001 when the RET was first commenced. And in 2010, we had the inclusion of exemption certificates under the production calculation method. And this was basically partial exemption. It related to the emissions intensity of the activity and tonnes of relevant product to determine the amount of partial exemption. Then in 2015, we extended that to make it 100% exemption. In 2018, we had another change, and this is where the electricity use method commenced. There was a transition period, and large-scale ET entities were encouraged, or actually were required, to transition in 2019 and 18. But from 2020, all ET entities need to actually apply using the electricity use method. 2019 saw the last year in which participants applied for the production calculation method. This slide highlights key differences between the production calculation method and the electricity use method. Most notably here is that the production method only actually saw one issuance of a letter, and that was the exemption certificate letter, where the electricity use method provides two letters. One is the exemption certificate, so that's your use amount formula as described on that letter. The second is the notice of certifiable amount letter, and that will be issued in January 2021 for 2020. That's where you need to add your data in. The other differences is that we've gone from a paper-based manual process from production to electronic-based process in the client portal. There were other details in there. For instance, when we go through and we talk about the exemption certificate and the use amount formula, we talk about M for metadata, E for other elements, and that's your calculations for equipment operating hours and things like that. So here are the key dates. Applications for exemption certificates open on the 1st of August 2020 and close on the 30th of March following the year. Typically, the bulk of applications are submitted in March of each year, just prior to the submission deadline. I would like to point out that should ET participants submit their applications earlier in the allowable period, certificates can be issued earlier, and the exemption determination tool can also be available earlier. That's where you add your data. Remember, an audit report is only required each 3 years of the application process. For example, if you have submitted an audit report in 2020, you are not due for another audit report until 2023. So the application process should be a lot easier on that basis. An added benefit of applying earlier in the submission window is if the application is refused. There is scope for the applicant to apply again prior to the deadline of the 30th of March. Once received, the regulator has 60 days to assess, approve, and issue an exemption certificate to the applicant. If the participant has 2 or more concurrent retailers or changing retailer at some point in the application year, this change needs to be applied for prior to the 31st of the application year. So if anyone's changed retailers this year for the 2020 application year, please put in that application and call us before you do so, just to make sure that everything goes smoothly. So we're here at our first set of question time, and I'm going to be hopefully led by John and Andrew, who is now back up online and will take over from the next part of this presentation. But can you please start to type your questions into the live Q&A feature now? It would be great if you could provide information as to whether you're willing and are able to complete an application earlier for the 2021 application year, for example, in February. You can type this information in by saying, yes, I would like to, or no, I cannot. Just again, if you could please provide an indication as to whether you are able to provide your 2021 application earlier by adding in, yes, I would like to, or no, I cannot. I'll now pause while we get some questions in, and then I'll be handing over to Andrew as well. Again, if you'd like to raise any questions outside of this forum, you can email us later through the inquiries at cleanenergyregulator.gov.au.
Yes, Prue, I think you're doing a fine job. There's certainly not a heap of questions yet, but there is one here that I'll pass on to you. It's an interesting one, a good question. And it is, what are the consistent issues you see with applications?
That is a great question, John, and thank you to that participant who has lodged that question. I guess one of the most key things that we notice during the assessment process is inconsistencies, and let me explain what I mean by inconsistencies. If you're actually lodging attachments that support your application, be that your electricity contract, an audit report, or other minor details like your line diagram and things like that, whatever's in your application needs to correlate with those documents and vice versa. That's one of the things, and I know it's a nitpicky thing, but it makes our lives and everybody's lives so much easier if that's all the same. Some other constant issues are just not providing the appropriate documentation to support your application, particularly where you might have a large site and there are lots of meters. Make sure to put that line diagram in, make sure that it's well annotated. That really truly does help the assessors to go through, and hopefully will make it easier so that you do get that exemption certificate back earlier, but more importantly, have that certainty that you're not going to get an email from us going, oh, we need more information from you. I think if you keep it back to those basic key principles and also check out our compliance priorities page that we've actually put up this year, you can't go wrong.
And so far, Prue, we have one more question. It's probably one that I can give an answer to straight away, and that is, do we need to apply every year, even if it only needs to be audited once every 3 years? And the answer to that is that yes, every time that you want to apply for exemption for a particular application year, the upcoming one being 2021, then you have to submit another application to receive exemption certificates for that year, whether or not you need an audit report in that particular year. And apart from that, I've got a number of responses, Prue, with regard to who wants to and who doesn't intend to submit applications before the new year, but I'll keep a tally of that. But there are no further questions at this stage.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John, and thanks everybody for participating with those questions and helping us out trying to understand whether you can lodge early or not. If Andrew is there and available, can I pass over to you now, Andrew?
Certainly can.
Lovely. Now, I'm not sure how we do that.
Unshare your screen, Prue, and I'm up to date where you are now, so if you want to unshare.
Okay, bear with me. Okay, I've stopped sharing.
And this one. Okay, does that look like it should?
We just need it in presentation land.
Stand by. Okay, how's that?
Lovely.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Prue, for covering that. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andrew, and I'll move on from here. So next slide is tips on exemption certificate application form. Now let's get into some tips where applying for exemption certificates in the client portal. These include executive officer and organisation contacts, liable entity document permission, liable entities under Regulation 22MA or 22LA, site details and activity groups, exemption determination, USAMET formula, audit report, what, when is it needed. Executive officers and organisation contacts. Key points for assigning an executive officer, primary and secondary contact. In order for a person to be identified as an organisation contact for application purposes, the person must have a client portal account. If that person is to be assigned as an executive officer, primary or secondary contact, that person must have that role added to their client portal account profile. The persons assigned to the primary contact role will receive all notifications from the application. These may include request for information, issuance of exemption certificate, and issuance of notice of certifiable amount. The executive officer listed in the application is the application delegate. If the executive officer electronically signs and submits the application, they become the form submitter and primary contact for notifications. Liable entity document permission. When adding in your liable entity details, please consider what permissions to your exemption certificate and exemption determination tool you wish to provide. Changes to permissions after the initial exemption certificate is issued will not take effect until the next time an action is completed. For example, change of liable entity or multiple liable entity or issuance of the notice of certifiable amount. Liable entities under Regulation 22MA and 22LA. If you will have multiple concurrent liable entities under Regulation 22MA for the application year, please identify the additional liable entities by answering yes and providing details, for example, dates or percentage of overall supply as applicable. If your liable entity changes in the application year, you can apply under Regulation 22LA to change your listed retailer by completing a change liable entity form available via the client portal. The site details. If an application has been made previously for the site, use the drop-down box to select the site. If this site is part of an activity group, relevant product relates to a single site for exemption purposes. Use your primary site here. Site details, activity groups. Activity groups Regulation 22A paragraph 9, if an ED activity is or is to be carried out on partly at one site and partly at one or more different sites, then all those sites constitute an activity group. Add the site name and application ID for each site application as per the slide. I believe there's a little laser pointer here. Can everyone see that? Nope, sorry, my apologies. The E-team recommends that you contact us before applying for an activity group, just so we can ensure that we're meeting all the requirements of the application itself, and making sure that everyone's got clarity on what they're achieving by applying under activity group. Exemption determination and the use amount formula. The CER system does not always accept unsolved arithmetic. As per the example on the slide, M1 in this case typically denotes the billing meter, and E1 denotes the result of calculation that represents the percentage to be applied to the billing meter that will result in an exemption amount. For clarity, where an input into the formula is something other than a meter reading, the participant is expected to complete necessary calculations to identify what E1 will be and enter that number in the E1 line in the determination tool. I will revisit entering data into the determination tool when I get to the notice of certifiable amount slide. So as you can see in this slide, that's essentially 3 different ways of expressing the same information. The top expression M1 times E1 is the preferred method, where M1 times the 0.75 in brackets could possibly be acceptable, but not as acceptable or ideal as M1 times E1. And the bottom example where M1 is times the 1 minus the 0.25, that is what we're referring to when we refer to unsolved arithmetic that the system, unfortunately, on occasions can't handle. So we need to move away from that and use the facility of the M1 and the E1 wherever applicable. Audit report. What, when is it needed? Regulation 22UB, or what, the audit report for the application must be prepared by a suitably registered and authorised person, give reasonable assurance conclusions that activities set out in the application comply in all material respects to Schedule 6 of the regulations, and be prepared by a person independent of the applicant. The Regulation 22UG, or when, an audit report is required when an applicant has not previously made an application for exemption at the site, required when the total amount of exemption is likely to exceed 15,000 megawatt hours, and is to be reassessed every 3 years. In addition to the points on the slide, excuse me, if a change of liable entity or entity's applications form is submitted in the client portal by a prescribed person under Regulation 22MA or 22LA, an applicant considers that as a result of applying under either of these regulations, the use amount formula should be identified in a way that is materially different from the use amount formula for the old liable entity, a new audit report may be necessary. However, having said that, the applicant may apply to the regulator for a determination that an audit report is not required. Such circumstances will be addressed on merit on a case-by-case basis. There will be a separate short webinar on amending exemption certificates tomorrow. Notice of certifiable amount. The exemption determination tool in the client portal becomes available to participants once the submitted application has been assessed and approved by the delegate. As per the slide, there are 3 key elements of the determination tool. Production quantity in tonnes. So production quantity must be updated as the determination tool is updated throughout the year. The Save and Calculate button will not be available while this field is not updated. Data entry of meter readings or element data in line with the agreed use amount formula. Meter data must be expressed in the megawatt hours. It is important to note, if you have a billing meter included in your use amount formula that is associated with the national electricity market, the regulator will receive third-party billing data from the Australian Electricity Market Operator and will be listed in Table 3. The participant options are to accept the AEMO data or enter their own meter data. If the participant opts to use their own metered data, an explanation is required to clarify why you have made that decision. Save and calculate when completing data entry as the application year progresses, and submit final readings once the application year is complete and all data has been entered. Once received by the team, a series of checks are completed and notice of certifiable amount is submitted to the delegate for approval and issuance. Note, please work towards finalising your data entry into the determination tool as soon as possible after the application year is complete. There will be a separate short webinar on the determination tool and the notice of certifiable amount later this week. Once again, it's some question time. You can type your questions into the live Q&A feature now. I will again now pause to allow time for questions to be entered, or you can email us later at inquiries@cleanenergyregulator.gov.au.
Hi there, Andrew. It's Prue here.
Hello, Prue. How are you?
Good. We do have a couple of questions here for you. I could probably answer them, but I'll let you do the honours. One question here is the executive officer does not understand the exemption certificate process. Does the primary hold that thought? The primary contact should not be a executive officer.
In that case, I would recommend that where possible, that when that application is submitted, that rather than giving the executive officer an opportunity to submit, approve and submit the application electronically, that whoever the intended primary contact is should do a print off of that application, which the system allows it to do, get a wet signature from the delegate, the executive officer, and then you can then scan that application back into the client portal and submit that from there. Once you submit that in that fashion, then the person who is listed as a primary contact will remain the primary contact.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrew. We have one other question here, which is, if there's a change in the formula, is an audit report required every 3 years?
If there isn't or is, sorry, Prue, just say?
Yeah, so I'll just read this to you. If there is a change in the use amount formula, I think the question is now supposed to be, is an audit report required every 3 years?
In accordance with the regulations, if you're running a site that expects to exceed 15,000 megawatt hours of exemption per application year, then you'll be required to resubmit an audit report every 3 years, regardless of whether the use amount formula changes or not.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I've just asked that person who did ask that question to get back to us if we haven't responded to their question appropriately. I have one more question here for you that's just popped in, where it talks about enter production data first. This is actually a question about what happens if you don't have your production data throughout the year. Obviously, we don't have that at the very end of the year. So what do we need to do to basically enter in that data?
Sorry, Prue, can you say that again?
Yep, sure thing. So this one is talking about the production data or the production quantity.
Yep.
That data won't be available by the end of the year. How do they go about adding in their data?
So sorry, the question. So basically, the question is, if you don't have your production data until the end of the year, how do they enter it in?
Mm-hmm.
It's a system limitation that there needs to be a production quantity amount listed in that part of the form. Our advice would be to just put a whole number in there throughout the year so that save and calculate button is available. It's important, and we'll cover this later in the week when I give the presentation on the notice of certifiable amount and the exemption determination tool. But the main point is that at the end of the application year and you've completed the data for the formula use amount, that at that point you need to have your current and up-to-date production number to enter into the exemption determination tool before submitting it. It would be great if people do have updated ongoing amounts on production quantity, but the main point being that it needs to be correct and entered on the point of submission to the regulator at the end of the application year.
I'm just looking through. We are actually getting lots more questions coming through now. The next question is about, do we need to include marginal loss factors or not? And Andrew, I'll take this one for you.
Yep.
So with the use amount formula, that is basically a description of what's happening on site. Your marginal loss factors or distribution loss factors or even transmission loss factors, depending on how your site is connected, are not included as part of this process. It's only about the electricity that you consume at your site connection. Okay, so that site meter, for all intensive purposes, your customer billing meter, that's the most appropriate point. Any loss factors from electricity from a generator halfway across the grid to get to you aren't included. We also have here another question that I will give to you, Andrew, and that is a clarification on an earlier question, which is if the use amount formula changes from one year to another and an audit report was first submitted, do they need to provide a secondary audit report?
I'd like to take that one on notice if I can, just to clarify the difference between where if there's a change, for example, if it's under 22 MA or LA and the use amount is different, considered different from the old liable entity, there technically would be an audit report required. But there is also room for the participant to seek a determination from the regulator that a new audit report is not necessary. I'm not confident off the cuff whether that would apply in this situation or not, unless you able to share anything on that, Prue?
No, I'm happy to take that one on notice. And look, if there's a number of people out there who do have a similar question, please put your hand up in the private chat and we'll get back to you independently. Apologies, I'm just reading through another question here and I'll just... I'm just being cautious that I don't want to miss any questions. So Please bear with me. Okay, it looks like we have answered all questions at this stage, Andrew. So I'm not sure if there's any more that would like to come through before we sign off. We still have 8 minutes to go if there's any further questions.
Perhaps point out, Prue, that if participants would like to ask a question, and it could be a response after the webinar is complete, if they could just highlight who they are, or give us an understanding of where the question's coming from, just to ensure we can get back to them.
Absolutely, and that's a fantastic idea, Andrew. Like any questions, please feel free to call us or email us, check out the website, whichever way you like to work, but we will definitely get back to you in regards to this webinar or any other further additional information at a later point in time. But I'm not receiving any more questions at this time. Except I lied. Here they come back in again. I'll answer some quick ones here now. What is the timing for exemption certificate and the notice of certifiable amount? So your exemption certificate application for the 2020 application year was due on the 30th of March 2020. This means that your notice of certifiable amount, which is showing the amount of exemption, will be basically needing to be lodged to us in January next year. And then we should be able to turn that around quickly for you on the assumption that we don't need to come back to you to clarify anything in regards to the data. And we're hoping to basically have everything processed by the 1st of February. And again, that does assume that your information is correct. So thanks for that question. The next question here is, if there is a failure in the meter, how are we able to fill in the data for the month? That is a lovely question in the sense that it does talk about a whole range of different things. So if we're talking about the billing meter or the NIMI, then AEMO does have a set of processes that they use to backtrack to give you an average or whatever it is they do to provide you with that value, and we're happy to accept that. If we're talking about an internal meter that you have provided, then in that case, please contact us and inform us of when you think it failed and how you're going to rectify that position so that we know what's actually going to happen when you do lodge your data. So just a reminder, please contact us if it is an internal meter so that we can work through how best you're going to get around that problem. It's definitely happens. Doesn't say it doesn't, but please contact us. I've got another question here about, are there any proposed changes for the exemption certificate process, and I assume including the notice of certifiable amount process? Currently, there are no changes proposed by the department at this time. There's definitely no changes by us. We, unfortunately, the regulator has to abide by the laws that we're given. So we will be following the process to the best of our abilities, like participants will be. Apart from the additional ET activities that are included from time to time, there is no significant changes about to happen. I've got a question here that I'm a little bit confused about because it says, when can we expect that? I'm not too sure what that's in relation to. If someone could give me a little bit more information on that, that would be great. Another question here is shutdowns. So plants will be shutting over different periods, i.e. Christmas to New Year holiday, and no one will be on site on the 31st of December. What do I do as far as my metering is concerned? That's a fantastic question. Basically, in this case, while we are talking about January to December for most of the participants here today, as far as your data set is concerned, my suggestion is that you read it at a consistent point in time. So if you can have someone on site on the 1st of January at a particular point of the day, and let's just say for argument's sake, midday, that would be great to read it at, for instance, midday. I know that there will be some variances with this, particularly if we are talking about a NIMI, where you can electronically get the data for a certain point in time consistently. But if you do have to read a meter manually, then my suggestion is to make it a consistent day and time, which will then facilitate effectively a 12-month period. I hope that answers your question, and that's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. I think we're okay to conclude the webinar, Andrew. There's not many more questions coming through.
Alrighty, so as per advised, this concludes today's webinar. For more information, please contact us by calling 1300 553 542. You can email us at inquiries@cleanenergyregulator.gov.au, or you can visit the website on www.cleanenergyregulator.gov.au. Thank you for your time and participation.